You know how the same exact fertility treatment can work wonders for one person and not so much for another? Ever wondered why that is? Well, the answer might just be written in your DNA. Today, we're going to unlock the science of how our unique genetic code can actually influence and maybe even predict how we'll respond to fertility treatments.
All right, you ready to jump in? Here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big fertility treatment puzzle. Then we'll introduce you to the star of the show, a hormone called FSH. After that, we'll see how your own personal DNA gets in on the action, put a couple of key genes under the microscope, and then we'll wrap up by looking at the really exciting future of personalized fertility. So, let's kick things off with the central mystery, the big question at the heart of assisted reproductive technology, or ART.
I mean, why is there no one-size-fits-all playbook here? Doctors follow the best protocols, they use the best science they have, but the outcomes? They can be completely different from one person to the next. It's so unpredictable. So what's really going on?
Well, there's this phenomenon that researchers call ovarian hyporesponse. It's this incredibly frustrating situation where a patient looks like a perfect candidate on paper, everything looks good, but then they have a surprisingly poor response to the treatment. It's a puzzle that medicine is now finally starting to solve.
And to solve that puzzle, we've got to meet the main character in our biological story.
Say hello to follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH for short. The best way to think of it is as the body's natural engine for growing follicles. It's so crucial that in fertility treatments, doctors use a synthetic version of it to encourage the ovaries to produce multiple eggs all at once. It is, without a doubt, the star of the whole show.
So how does it actually work? Well, you can think of FSH as being on a three-step mission. First, it goes out and recruits the team, the new follicles for the upcoming cycle. Then, step 2, it acts like a coach, stimulating their growth and getting them to produce key hormones. And finally, it hits this big peak right in the middle of the cycle to help kick off the whole ovulation process. It's a real workhorse hormone.
Okay, so what does any of this have to do with our big puzzle? Well, it turns out the biggest clue has been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right inside our DNA.
And this is where things get really fascinating. Let's use an analogy. Imagine the FSH hormone is a key, and the cells on the ovaries have a special lock just for that key, called an FSH receptor. For most people, what scientists call the wild type, the key fits the lock perfectly. Click. But some of us have what's called a genetic variant. It just means we have a slightly different version of that gene. So maybe the key is shaped a little differently, or maybe the lock is. Either way, that connection just isn't as snug, not quite as efficient.
And this idea right here is the foundation of an incredible field called pharmacogenomics. It is literally the science of figuring out how your unique genetic makeup affects how you respond to medications. The goal is huge, to finally move away from that one-size-fits-all approach and into an era of truly individualized medicine.
Okay, that's the big picture. Now, let's get specific. We're going to zoom right in and put two of the most impactful of these genetic variants under the microscope.
First up, let's talk about a really common variant in the gene for the FSH receptor. You know, the lock from our analogy. The scientific name is a bit of a mouthful, FSH-RRS6166.
So what actually happens if you have this less efficient lock? Well, studies show it leads to something called impaired ligand sensitivity. It's a fancy term, but all it really means is the lock isn't as sticky. It's not as good at grabbing onto the FSH hormone. And clinically, that can translate to needing higher doses of medication just to get a response, and sometimes retrieving fewer eggs at the end of the treatment cycle.
And get this is not some rare mutation we're talking about. The version of the gene associated with this less sensitive receptor is found in an astonishing 43% of the global population. Almost half of us are walking around with this. It's an incredibly common piece of our collective human puzzle.
Okay, on to our second variant. This time, we're not talking about the lock anymore, we're talking about the key itself. This is a variant that affects the gene that actually produces the FSH hormone in the first place.
Now, this variant is linked to what's called decreased transcriptional activity. Again, big science term, simple idea. The gene's instructions are just a bit quieter, like the volume is turned down. So the body is naturally programmed to produce less FSH. And this can have noticeable effects, like longer menstrual cycles, menopause starting a bit later, and, most relevant for us, a reduced response when taking ovarian stimulation medication. This particular variant is less common than the one affecting the receptor, for sure, but it's still found in about 12% of people globally. That is still a significant number of people who might be genetically predisposed to a different kind of response.
So when you put all this information together, what does it really mean for the future? How do we take this incredible knowledge and use it to change outcomes for patients?
The research itself puts it perfectly. It suggests that this genetic approach could help optimize treatments, and not just to reduce those poor responses, but also to prevent the opposite problem, excessive responses like ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, or OHSS, which can be a really serious complication.
So here's the real, tangible promise of all this. This genetic approach could finally explain that unexpected poor response. It could empower doctors to tailor treatment protocols and dosages right from the very beginning. And that could mean reducing bad outcomes, decreasing serious risks, and ultimately easing the immense physical and emotional toll that fertility treatment can take.
So we'll end on this thought. As this science keeps moving forward, we're getting closer to a future where a simple genetic test really could be the key that unlocks a truly personalized fertility plan, one that's tailored not just to your health history, but to your very own DNA.